that's like the aspect of metal I don't like, where it's like acceptable to just like, oh, we're a death metal band that sounds just like a 90s death metal band. It's like, really? Like, because I can put on Monstrosity right now and I'll be very happy. I'll be happier listening to that than to you.
Welcome to the Dreams of Consciousness podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
My name's Terence, and I do vocals and keyboards in Locrian.
And Terence, how would you describe the music of Locrian?
That's a tough question, even with my heads up. I guess it's, we kind of straddle the worlds of experimental, drone, ambient, and metal. So we're kind of in between all of that. And metal's pretty broad, from black metal inspiration to kind of death metal-y parts. I mean, we're kind of all over the map with that. But yeah, so somewhere in there, noise, ambient, and metal-ish.
I mean, in the way that you combine metal with the more atmospheric parts, would you say that there's an overall philosophy, or maybe
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like we just are looking to expand the palette for ourselves. I think like it's very kind of insular in a way, and we're kind of looking at like our influences and flipping certain things on their head a little bit, like when we write. So, I think that's our goal. It's like this intention of like, there might be like something that's straightforward, and then we'll be like, well, what if, we do this thing to it that is what you wouldn't expect. And that tends to be kind of our modus operandi or something.
Yeah. Not to be pedantic, but I'm curious what your answer to this will be. What is metal to you? How would you describe metal?
That's a great question. I love that question, actually. I think about that all the time. I think that, so it gets hard, right? In some ways, like, is metal like Deep Purple, or is metal like, all the way to like cerebral rot?
Is it Dragon Force?
Like, I would never listen to Dragon Force, but like, I have no interest in them. But yeah, I mean, I get it. Like, I think everyone who listens to metal can be like, well, that's clearly metal. It's just not what I prefer to listen to, right? So I don't know. I mean, I think there's a certain quality of heaviness, I think. And there is what I would say what differentiates it perhaps from other heavy music is there has to be some kind of proficiency somewhere in there. Speed, because it was slower or faster, or guitars that have, talent, I guess, or keyboard. I don't know. Obviously, it doesn't have to be a screamed vocal, doesn't have to be sung, it doesn't have to have vocals at all. So, I think, metal's pretty broad, but I would say there's that like intensity, a sense of, heaviness, a sense of that dark atmosphere to me that has to kind of permeate it. Even though I say that kind of fully knowing that power metal is not trying to be dark, right? I get it. and I love, some of that stuff too. But it's like, I think if you're, I think everyone's going to have a different answer, and I think that that's interesting, but that's a great question. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's what I would say. It has to have some kind of like darkness to it, like going back to like the Sabbathy, kind of inception of whatever this is, to some kind of proficiency. This isn't punk where 3 chords are okay. It can be a little bit like that, but it needs to have something has to be happening that people have practiced their instruments.
Right. It's like the
yeah.
I forget who it was, but the definition of pornography is I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably like everyone probably feels like metal is this, like these things that I listen to are metal,
right, yeah.
But I'm listening to things all the time, and I'm always kind of like, literally today I was listening to the new Judas Priest album because Andre and Locrian was like, it's really good, and I was like, no way, and I put it on, I'm like, it's freaking great. It is like impressively good how good it is. Like, I'm like, it's like an embarrassment, but it's so good. It's like you don't expect a band that old to have like killer, like they sound like vital, and the riffs are sick like throughout the whole thing. So it's like, just when you think you're gonna write somebody off, like, man, they made a killer album. I listened to it from start to finish. I didn't even think I'd make it through the second song, and I was like, this is awesome. Like, what a great record. Like, I don't know if you've heard it yet, but I think it's really good. But, you know, being surprised, like something you didn't think you'd like, you put it on, you're like, whoa, like this blows me away, you know?
So when you and Andre and Steve got together, was it originally to play heavy music? Do you guys have a good sense of what you wanted Locrian to be?
I think, well, I think we wanted it. Yes. No, I mean, it was definitely intentional. Like Andre and I had played in like kind of like a doomy folk project. And then we started Locrian. He was in a tech death band that kind of had broken up. And we were doing this other thing. And he was like, what if we do another metal thing, but you play, because I had all these noise cassettes and things that I was doing like on my own. And he was like, what if we combine these two ideas and we can play this one show and we'll see what happens. And yeah, so a long time later, we're still doing it. But the idea, I think, was like, we were really into, you know, there was just this weird kind of scene of like, you know, I think like maybe at the top of it was like bands like Sun or Connate or Clust or these other bands, but there are all these bands that were just like two people like Naja or something like that were just like making weird metal-ish doomy kind of drone stuff, I guess. And we were like, this is kind of what we want to do. And I think kind of opened the door because we were kind of one foot in the noise scene of like Wolf Eyes or Malthus and like a lot of stuff on Load Records, and the other foot kind of in, well, we just want to listen to Obituary all the time, you know? So I think it was like finding this balance of, making something heavy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I came to a lot of stuff like shoegaze and drone from the metal side, not knowing that there was this whole like almost non-rock scene of bands who were doing ambient and experimental music.
Yeah.
And not knowing like much about it is just like hearing these bands and being like, oh, this is kind of like Neurosis. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think Neurosis was a really big one for me. I think like Through Silver and Blood was huge when like amongst my circle of friends when it came out. And, some of us, I didn't get to see them that tour, but my friends did. And, it was just so intense, that tour. And it kind of just like was this lore that spread around them. And I think that they were a band that kind of opened those gates in a way, like, oh, you like this? You're going to like these other things, like.
Right. Yeah.
I think that like, or like, cause when they made that record, the Tribes of Neurot record came out, right? Which was like a synced up album of drums to Silver and Blood, if I remember correctly. And I thought that was just like amazing. So like we would like time the CDs, like, does it line up? And like, like it was just like, it kind of gave you this other experience about music. And, and Neurosis was pretty DIY, like, but it seemed massive and just huge, like, I don't know, like, I think that definitely kicked open the door for me too.
Yeah. I'm curious because, the era when you guys got together and started releasing, were people pretty open-minded about what you guys were doing? Were they welcoming, or was it a lot of like indie kids saying that this is too heavy, and metal kids saying that this isn't heavy enough?
I mean, again, like there was this record shop in San Francisco called Aquarius. I don't know if you have ever been there or heard of it, but Aquarius Record was like, we were in Chicago, but I would just wait kind of every week Aquarius Record to send this giant email out with like tons of stuff, and their descriptions were like amazing. And it was like, and I just would order like a CDR from New Zealand through them and be like, all right, like this sounds great. And I was just like, this weird description, this like sample of an MP3. And I was like, all right, like, and I would find all these amazing bands. How I found Aiden Baker. It's how I got into Weakling, because it was a description of Weakling. And I was like, well, that sounds like the black metal I want to hear. And I remember it's like, it was the black metal I wanted to hear. Like, it was really cool. So I think, at the time, no, I say that knowing that like I was probably like one of like a handful of dozens of people who really cared about this. Like I know that. And some of the things that I was getting stoked on were like the addition of 20 CDRs or 50 cassettes or whatever, you know? So I think that was like our perspective was like, we're doing something weird and on the fringe because we started without, Steven wasn't in the band when we started. It was just guitar, synths and vocals and a lot of like tape players and weird instrumentation. The reception was strange. You know, I think that we had definitely like metal people that were like really into it right away because they got it. Like we were like, my biggest inspiration was probably Abruptum in the black metal world because it was like, is that even metal at some point? You know, like it just gets so out there and it's just like, what? And I loved it. Like I was like, this is great. Sounds like I'm losing my mind. You know, like I loved it. I thought just like when you close your eyes and listen, like what horror movie or was playing in your head, and I just immediately gravitated towards that. Like, you know, that was to me way freakier than anything Mayhem was doing or any of those bands. Like I was like, oh, it's weirder when they kind of are going off into space and there's no drummer or like or it's even synths are taking over or whatever. And I thought that was more interesting. So I don't know. The reception was what it was, and you know, there were definitely metal people into it. We would play metal shows. We would play noise shows like in basements, and you know, it was kind of a different time because I think like Wolf Eyes got signed to Sub Pop, so it was like everybody had a noise band and a noise tape label, and it was kind of like cool. And then of course, you know, kind of faded out, but it was really cool at the time. I think like that there's like strange bands making weird sounds with like junk scrap metal and contact mics, and it was like, all right, like it was neat, you know. And so I feel that we kind of were in there, but we were like, we kind of quickly went from like, oh, we're doing this thing, but what if we wrote songs that were songs that we could like play again? You know, like the next time we play, we could play the same song. And that was like the shaping of where we would go, you know, and like, you know, we were always interested in that. And, you know, I think that kind of changed it. And I think kind of broadened maybe the audience a little bit.
So, starting with you and Andre, how were you guys writing songs? Was it jamming, for lack of a better term?
It really was. At first, it was all improvised. To be honest, it was all just like, I'm in this key, okay, and then we just kind of feel it out. And so some of it wasn't great, and some of it was something we liked. We were like, well, that's a good direction, and we would kind of record everything and listen to it and kind of talk about it. And then I think there's a record called Grayfield Shrines, and that was kind of like the one we went in and we did something different, and we were much more like structured about where things were going to happen, and that really changed for us. Like, it was pretty bleak, it was pretty dark, it was very moody, and I think that we were like, this is what we got to do. This is the sound we want. Like, it's just like this evocation of like images and feelings and it was pretty emotional, and I think that for us, that was the record where we were like, this is the direction. It's kind of like, yes, there's improvisation, but we had a pretty long conversation and we kind of knew where some of the changes were going to be, but we felt them out. And we're like, that was, I think, like the big shift in what we were doing. And then the big shift really was the Crystal World, I think, was like the big, like, this is, songs we still play, today. So, but then that became like a riff, or someone had a riff idea and we would kind of like hold on to it. And then we'd start to structure kind of simple parts around it and still kind of feel it out. Like, I think now, like End Terrain, it's much more structured, and, we were intentionally doing that.
Right. And as far as the structure goes, when you guys are working on your arrangements, do you guys have, are you still starting with improvisation, or are things written much more purposefully?
So I think the irony was, for End Terrain, we kind of got a lot of the improvisation out of our system with New Catastrophism, because that was totally improvised. We hadn't been together in a long time because of the pandemic, and we were working on End Terrain, but we decided, let's just go in and just improvise and kind of make a record for our older fans that, that maybe they would appreciate, kind of like harkening back to like our CDRs and weird cassette releases. But we also, because we knew that we needed more work, like on End Terrain, like the song's structure wasn't there. Like, we knew we wanted it to be more challenging, like musically for us, and then when it came time for End Terrain writing, we would just sit there, and we had 7 years of demos that we had been sending each other. And so we kind of prioritized riffs, and then we would all kind of like, does this riff and that riff go together? And we kind of would like start to figure out little structures kind of while we were on, because we all live in different states, like kind of online. And then Andre moved here kind of into the DC area. And so him and I, every weekend, we just sit in my basement and be like, we just pick a song and like work through it. We send it to Steven, and he'd be like, what if this happened? So then I would record it and kind of like write in breaks and kind of like, I would put drum machines in there. I put different other things, kind of like, this is going to be another idea. I don't know what it is yet. And like put it in there. So it was much more direct, but we would sit there and like riff and kind of like, and we just try to record it. So then if you have a harmony idea, and like for me, like I kind of have to listen to things for a while and kind of come up with my parts, and I would like just kind of listen to the demos and like, oh, I could do this thing, I could do that thing, I could do that thing. And so I bring it in. In the end, we wound up kind of doing all of it, because we kind of felt that the record, we wanted to feel more maximal than like minimal, like the last record. So I think it really paid, and I'm really glad. I mean, like, would it have been better to make a record before 7 years passed? Probably, but at the same time, it was like just what the songs required for us, like we just had to kind of work on them, and it's a bit of a change for us. So I think we got to get the improvisational album. Like, we hadn't practiced. We practiced in my basement for like an hour before we went in the studio on New Catastrophism. But then on End Terrain, it was like years of like workshopping online, in person, like, what's this riff doing? Like, what are the possible harmonies on that riff? And just kind of like going back and forth with things and finding all the little like bits that we wanted and recording it. And I would edit it in like Audacity or something stupid, and just like, all right, this is kind of the structure of the song, and we like all like be like, all right, this is cool, this is it. And then we get in the studio and everything changes because we're like, oh, it sounds so much better this way, like. And we had an engineer that was Jay Robbins, who was just totally, like in it with us, like giving us suggestions, encouraging different things. So it changes when you're in the studio sometimes, and we've been playing together a long time, so we're all pretty comfortable with like, all right, that sounds better. Like, let's just do it, and we practice it in the studio and we nail it. So it felt very organic in the end, but it was definitely not improvised for Enter Rain.
So I definitely want to talk about working with Jay Robbins and what he brought to this album.
Sure. Yeah.
Before we get there, let's talk about your vocals. At what point do they come in? Are the songs mostly done when you start adding your vocals, or are they embedded in the writing process?
That's a good question. I think I'm always looking for the moment, but I like it. I'm pretty picky. Like, I don't I get annoyed when I realize that someone's been screaming or singing 75% of the time in the song. Like, I'm just like, I have no idea what you're saying anymore. Like, I'm like, there's nothing important here. So, like, I'm just like, I mean, I appreciate it. Like some vocalists can do that, but I'm like to me, like,
you don't want to scat like Gibby Haynes?
No. Oh my God. No, I think, it's just like, there's, and I'm always like of the metal that influences me, like of black metal, where it's like you push the vocals back, it's atmospheric, it's not, or like shoegaze, like it doesn't have to be the most audible, legible part of this. Like it's an instrument like a synthesizer in my head. That's what I think. So it is kind of like, as we're writing, I'm like thinking about it, but I don't know all the time, like, well, what's the verse-esque moment and what is the like chorus-esque moment? Like, we don't really have verses and choruses all the time. And that helps. Like, are we repeating something? And then it's like, if it's like really notey and busy, I might be like, I'm not going to do anything over this thing. That's stupid. Like, listen to the awesome riff and, like that. I don't know. I just make decisions, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes, honestly, like sometimes like I'll have my idea, and then we're recording like on Enter Rain, like we'll be recording, and Andre and Steven are like, you should do something right here. Do something now. And I'll be like, okay. And like, just like, I'll try a few ideas, and it's like, sometimes that's how it happens. Like, it's just because they heard in their head that there were vocals, and I'll just try something. But that's our band relationship. Like, I'll say that to Andre, like, you need to do this other guitar part right here. And he'll be like, what do you hear? I'm like, you need to get this effect and that guitar and do that. And he's like, and it comes up with this amazing idea. And I'm like, I'm glad I said something, so that's our relationship. So I definitely have stuff. Like, I probably had more lyrics written before we went into the studio now, because we had so much time. We had 2 phases of the recording process. So I was able to like take home half the record with vocals and half the record didn't. And I just was like, sit there and kind of like listen to it and come up with it, and, and decide I needed more time or less time. And, and it was, I could come up with the palette. Like, I think, but in the past it would be, I normally would be in the studio while we were like recording some other guitar parts. I would just start writing the lyrics kind of there. I'd have a book of notes, and I would just start piecing together all the notes and references that I was referring to. So, it's always different. This one, I had a ton of notes and ton of references to different like philosophy and science fiction, and I was trying to write from a different perspective, and also try to vary it, like have singing and have screaming and have different vocal styles. And, I think that, again, like that kind of maximalist, like just like where there was a little bit of everything kind of in a way, it was kind of the intent.
So, as Terence mentioned, the album we're talking about is called End Terrain, and it will be out on the 5th of April through Profound Law Records. You mentioned that in some ways that End Terrain is a reaction to your previous album, New Catastrophisms. Did I say that correctly?
Mm-hmm. Catastrophism.
Catastrophisms.
Yeah. That's a tough one. Yeah, yeah.
In the sense that the previous album was done in the improvised manner of your earlier recordings, and this one was much more structured.
Mm-hmm.
Going into this album, did you guys have a good sense of what you wanted it to sound like?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think we were definitely like, we wanted these kind of big, I mean, riffs. Like Andre had these kind of like circular kind of tapping lead things that he was doing. And I was like, these are great. Like, and I knew that was a big element of it.
Speaking of Priest, like it's very riffy in that sense. Like it does have that kind of classic.
You know, I texted him today because he told me to listen to the new Priest album, and I was like, I know why you like this. Like, I was like, it's like, because there's all these like all these crazy leads, and I'm like, dude, this is like, I get it, and like, I mean, it's a great record, but and I can talk about it all the time, but I think, and I know where Andre's coming from a lot with like this kind of King Crimson kind of influence and the prog kind of aspect. And I thought it was interesting, like how much, you know, the riffs that we were recording that he was writing, you know, I know for him, it was not just this kind of metal influence. Like he was really into like Public Image Limited and Keith Levine's style, which is very like circular and repetitive and not very punk, right? Like he was playing an aluminum guitar. It's very clangy. Or like Asa's guitar parts in Lungfish, the post-punk band, you know, like, which are influences that all of us share, you know, like in the band. So we're like, I knew that that's kind of like his brain was kind of going there, and that was a part of it. But like to us, like we don't want to like, yeah, man, I could talk to you about Judas Priest all day, but I don't want to make a record that sounds like them. Like I don't want to even try. Like that's not me. Like I don't want to make a record that sounds like Lungfish either. Like that's kind of been at the core of the band, was always like, yeah, like Sun's awesome, but if I dressed in a robe and played the same note slowly for an hour, I think I'd lose my mind. Like I can never, and I don't think that that's a worthy, like, it's kind of like a cover band to me. And I really don't, that's like the aspect of metal I don't like, where it's like acceptable to just like, oh, we're a death metal band that sounds just like a 90s death metal band. It's like, yeah. Really? Like, because I can put on Monstrosity right now and I'll be very happy. I'll be happier listening to that than to you. You know, like It's just I'll never understand that kind of, or like the thrash revival. It's like thrash was pretty awesome. Like Voivod's still around and are phenomenal. Like I don't need any of this. Like I don't know. Like that's me. That's like my personal, like what bothers me, because like to me it's like music needs to move forward and be creative. Like we're totally inspired by our influences in thrash. Like that's definitely like Steven's probably like, you know, biggest moment was like in the West thrash was around. Like that's like his favorite time period of metal next to like 90s death metal. But like if we were just doing that, I think it'd be, what are you bringing? Like you're bringing nothing. You're doing nothing new, you know? And I think, I mean, and a lot of those subgenres exist and thrive, and that's fine. But it's not where I want to be. Like I think it's more exciting to kind of like mix it up and have like a little like nod to the thrash, or a nod like to Tom G. Warrior in a song, and just be like, dude, maybe someone else will pick up on that. I hope they do, because we're huge fans, you know? So it's like, you know, it's exciting for us to kind of like be on that edge of like, are people going to get this? Or is it going to be too like, you know, like we're moving too fast or something between different genres? But yeah.
Honestly, you're preaching to the choir, because I had such a reaction to all the revival movements, because, you know, like the joke I like to make is that I was listening to old school death metal when it was just called death metal. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, me too. And I remember when thrash was this revolutionary sound, and these bands weren't trying to bring something back. Do you know what I mean? Like, the one band Slayer wasn't listening to when they were writing Rain and Blood with Slayer.
Yeah, or I think even it's like I grew up probably in a similar time period where I always felt when people were like explaining death metal to me, and I like got Obituary, and I was like, oh, okay. And then I got Morbid Angel. I'm like, this doesn't sound like Obituary. And then I got Deicide. I'm like, well, that doesn't sound like. And then to me, it was just like, oh, I get it. It's like it's about what you're saying, the speed you're playing it at. Like it's pretty grim, you know, like, and that to me kind of set the tone of like, it doesn't all have to sound the same, you know, but I think at the same, you know, like, I think that, but then that makes bands like Blood Incantation or Cerebral Rot or whoever like stand out more because they're so good at what they're doing and pushing it in this other direction that you're like, okay, it's not like Nocturnus. It's like doing its own thing, you know, like, and I appreciate that about some of the newer bands. Like that I'm like, I like that about Tomb Mold or whatever. It's like, this is beautiful, you know, like with their take on it is interesting to me, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we are coming out of this revival period, and the irony is, I mean, you know, I think very predictably, all the bands that were doing the old school revival thing, you know, now that they're 3-4 albums into their career, they're experimenting with like rock and roll. They're experimenting with prog. They're, you know, the songs are getting longer.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is exactly what the original death metal bands did, you know, back in the early 90s. So
yeah. I like Control Denied, my friend.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
You know, yeah, no, it's, I think it opens things up and I hope in the end it, you know, I think it makes an audience more, hopefully more like, oh, like the palette can be wider and more expansive and, you know, like there's room for, you know, your entire synth rock album, you know, like.
Right. Can you tell me a little bit about the concept behind Entering?
Sure. You know, every record we write, we kind of have a theme. And I think with this album, we definitely were trying to, you know, there was definitely like the mantra in the studio was, well, we haven't done this before. Let's try it, you know? And that was definitely on our minds as I was like writing the lyrics. So on one hand, I decided kind of early on that I wanted to write the lyrics from like my perspective, like a future, like a letter from a parent to kind of like to the past, like to the future generations from the past, if that makes any sense, through this kind of lens that we tend to write through, which is like about environmentalism and catastrophe. And I was just thinking about like, I'm a parent and just kind of this attitude that like, we really haven't generated, like we haven't really helped save the planet that much, and that our legacy shouldn't be mourned in a way, and that like the subsequent generations should kind of move on and not look back because we really haven't left them with much to survive on, to live with. And I think if that was a different perspective, was kind of like making it more personal, like about this regret that I was like kind of channeling or something, that wasn't making the situation better in some way. And that, you know, there's going to be subsequent generations that will deal with, you know, kind of what we're leaving behind, whether that be microplastics or different types of toxic waste and brown fields and gray fields and all that stuff. And like, what is the legacy of all this destruction? And that kind of became the story, the narrative that we were working with, was describing this future landscape and kind of like that generations would continue until eventually, you know, like it would end at some point. And that was the theme. A very pleasant theme.
Now, when you say narrative, is this something that you can follow from song to song, from beginning to end?
Yes, and that's the intent. We hope is that it is like a, you know, prog inspired idea, like from start to finish. There's this album kind of, and it's very deliberate where things are and what it's about. That's the intent. And there's actually like a book of short stories that comes with like the LP and CD. called Our Dead Age. It's like I wrote them and also had like some help from some AI to write a few other ones, and they're credited because it's funny. But we wanted the world to feel like bigger a little bit in some way, like of the album. So we kind of, Andre and Steven were like, you should write some stories, and I hadn't really written for a bit, and decided that I wrote one, and I was like, I can do this. This is fun. So I wrote like 9 short experimental stories that kind of go along with the album, and hopefully it kind of expands the world a little bit, you know.
So you're a visual artist, but do you also do fiction writing?
Yeah, yes, I have, and I do. I kind of took a break. I was like working on a novel and just felt like I couldn't solve it, and I have a friend. There's this really great writer. His name's Jeremy Bushnell. He's written some great books, and he was like, he read my novel and was like, I think this needs to be longer. And I was like, oh my God. Like, he's like, I think it just needs to feel like you could never finish it, like as a reader. And I was like, I don't know if I can write that novel. But then I started, I was like, I think he's right. And I was like, all right. So I kind of was like, I'm taking the break. I got to think of the other stories that fit into that novel. And then I was on the break when my bandmates were like, you should write some other stuff for like short, just like, don't even think about it, just write it. And then it just like happened really quickly, actually, for entering.
So, extinction and environmental themes seem to be something that you'd like to write about, at least within the scope of Locrian.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, is this something that you're engaged with in your personal life?
I mean, I think, yes. I mean, in some ways, it's something I definitely think about. I feel, and for me, it's like Locrian and these records is kind of a way to release this like pressure. And I think for me, it comes from, certain books like in science fiction, like whether it's Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer or J.G. Ballard, like The Crystal World or The Drowned World, Anna Kavan's Ice, just like books that's kind of place the environment at the center and kind of give you this strange kind of look at it. I think that's always been like, I think before I had a band, but when I was reading like The Drowned World, like in college, I was like, it really was impactful to me. And I think as we got together with Locrian, that kind of theme just became a thing the three of us really felt, was a worthy of our time, like to kind of make records about and have people think about. And we've had some really interesting interactions with different activists and writers, and it's been really rewarding as it like unfolds. I mean, I hope in some ways it makes people think, and I hope it, I think it's not like necessarily original. I mean, I think like there's definitely bands like, whether it's Napalm Death or whatever, that kind of take on different topics like that or something. I think for us, it's kind of like shaping these albums around these themes, and kind of like, for me, it's like a form of writing. Like I'm writing, like to me, it's like I'm trying to make this world that you're in, to envision a future, and maybe it's not one you want to be in or something, and what could you do to change it?
I mean, with Return to Annihilation and now with Entrain, it does seem like the stories, at least, or the albums, have a nihilistic bend to them. But are you hopeful? Are you yourself hopeful?
I mean, I actually am. It's like, again, like I get to kind of like purge these things in a record, man. Like, like I get to like say whatever horrible thought pops in there, and you start to think about it, and you start thinking about, that, we're in this very corrupt system of cronyism or whatever, and the corporations get away with all this stuff, and you're looking at, ridiculous floods like all over the country, all over the world, like these, like, it's 70 degrees today in Baltimore, like it's like, what the heck, like. And it's like, how else can you confront this? When you can ignore it, like we tend to kind of like, when it's nice out, we ignore it, But then when it's like, the water's in your home, and it didn't used to be like that, and it didn't snow all winter, and it used to snow all the time. You start, like there is kind of like a creeping uncertainty that I think everyone's kind of engaging with in different ways, and for some, it's probably let's ignore it and make a joke about it and we'll move on. For others, it might be like, I can't insure my home anymore because I'm in a floodplain, and, or whatever, like some real kind of like tangible stuff. But there's also this cognitive dissonance that exists, right? Like where, some people don't think it's happening, even though it is absolutely, it's happened. You're in the middle of it. There's no going back, And I think that it's terrifying. And I am hopeful, though. Like, again, like I have kids, and they're really into science, and they're really like love it because, literally, we're like talking about it today. And I'm just like, man, like I just love how optimistic and like how engaged they are. And and I teach at a college, and even with my students, just like how they're going to change this and change that. And I deal in like manufacturing and digital fabrication and the issues around sustainability going on in that sector. I'm just like, this could possibly change things, like, and it's like small, but it's like, those are small things that could be big things. And that's pretty cool, like to be around people that are really interested in that and see the potential future in that. So I do have hope. I'm not like a total nihilist, but I get to release my nihilist valve in Locrian, and it feels so good. So
So, as you mentioned, Entrain was recorded and mixed by Jay Robbins. Have you guys worked with Jay Robbins before?
So I have like a dream pop band with my wife called The Holy Circle. We had recorded with him 2 records, and we love Jay, and he's just such a great engineer and great person. And I'd always kind of told the guys like, hey, we can record with Jay. He's really cool. He's in Baltimore. He's pretty affordable, and he's, you know, like very creative and thoughtful and all the things that we like in engineers. And New Catastrophism was our first time with him, actually. And everybody, and Andre and Steven just were like, he's the best. Like they love him. And, you know, that was kind of the beginning of our relationship. And I think I know from talking to him, he was just like unsure, because I was like, yeah, we haven't practiced. We're just going to book some time and record this record. So no pressure, you know? And he was like, immediately after we started, it was just like, he was right there, like offering suggestions, weird plugins to put on things. And, you know, we kind of told him the next record's going to be like a song based record. And he was just like, I'm in, like, totally, I'm there. And has been, I mean, honestly, he's been a big champion of us and of ours. And he's phenomenal. Like, his new record's great. Like, you know, it's been awesome to see Jawbox kind of get all this attention. And it's kind of crazy because I have these distinct memories of like being in high school when Novelty was out and Gripe on cassette from Discord Records, because they were like $6 or something at that time, which is crazy. And I remember like listening to them, like really enjoying those records. And it was kind of nuts to me to be like hanging out with Jay. And I admire him quite a bit. I think he's a really amazing person and huge JG Ballard fan. So he was like already like in the zone with us totally about like kind of dystopian futures and all that stuff. Like he was like so with it with us and the soundscape we wanted to make. So Jay's awesome. Yeah.
I mean, besides weird plugins, what would you say Jay Robbins brought to the sound of Entrain or to the sound of Locrian?
I think, you know, I think it was a lot of, so Jay's really, I love working with Jay. And one of the things he does is he'll like raise his hand. Like, I have an idea. And then he'll share, you know, whatever he's thinking, like do that part again, but through the Leslie speaker, or do this part this way through this thing. Or like, I think the end of this song should end and not drift off. And so a lot of those things was like I think at the end of Utopias, if you've heard that track, that was like a big one. He was like, I think you should end the song with like an ending. And we're like, okay. He was like, it should be like this. And he like hummed it. And we're like, we can do that. Like that literally became the ending of the song, because he was like, I think it should be like dun 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 dun. And there's something we're like, we can do that. And then we all like figured out our parts and did it. And you know, things like that. Like he was just like, you know, whether it was just like drifting off for 10 minutes or whatever, he was never like, all right, guys, where's this going? It was always like, the journey is going to produce something really valuable at the end. And so there's a space to experiment and the space to like, when we kind of were like, we want to tighten it up. And he would be like, I have this idea. And he would like, you know, whether it was like, you know, click tracks or using the drum machine. And we did a lot of that kind of like going back and forth between live drums and drum machine and kind of like playing with those ideas. I think that it was just like this creativity and kind of like that really was what Jay brought to it, just like telling us when, you know, or like looking at us like, you could do it better. And like he didn't have to make us feel bad. We're like, yeah, I can. And we would just like hit it one more time, you know, and it would be the better take, you know. And I think just like he felt comfortable being, you know, listening and hearing what we were doing and kind of telling us what was on his mind. And I think it isn't always the case. Like a lot of bands kind of are like, maybe they're built from like one member's like the ground floor and everybody else kind of is built on top of it and don't question that hierarchy. We're not like that. Like we're very, you know, we're pretty experimental. We're pretty like, who has the idea? Like, what's your next idea? And then we kind of like build off of it. It's very iterative. And I think, you know, that's, you know, probably not a lot of bands work that way, where everyone kind of gets heard and everybody has a veto like immediately. And I think, in the studio, it's a safe space. Like, so we get to kind of like express things, and we're like, let's try that again. Let's, or whatever. But normally we kind of nail it in the first or second try and kind of get the idea down and we build on it. So Jay was just there, like encouraging it and hearing things we could do better and offering suggestions of like, and especially in mixing, like tightening up the album. Cause we were, some of the tracks were gonna be a little bit longer in before mixing. And then once we started mixing, it was like, we don't need this long intro. And actually, like, we start with Chronoscapes, and that was like, let's just start. Like, the album should just go. Like, that was like an intentional decision. Like, it should just begin instead of like normally we'd have this like 5-minute droney jam. It was like, let's not do that. We've done that. Let's not do it again. Let's do something different, and like more like Eternal Return or something. Like that was kind of the idea, and I think Jay was really into that, like, and was right there next to us, kind of encouraging it.
I mean, it sounds like even at the mixing stage, you guys are open to or not against changing arrangements. Composing, exactly.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, to us, I mean, the studio is an instrument. Like, I love it. Like, I mean, that's like I love being in the studio. Like, it's so much fun. Like a little dinky riff just becomes epic, right? Like, you've overdubbed it. I mean, then we gotta play it live. Like, but we've been a band that hasn't played live in a while, so it's been like, who cares? Like, we had the pandemic. Like, the whole landscape's different. Whatever, man. Yeah, like to me, again, it's like to me, it's like you're opening a book, like you're opening a novel. Like, I want you to like just fall into this world. But I'm not going to do that. To me, it's not the same as like a Steve Albini type of production. Like, I love Steve Albini, but like I've never wanted to work with him because it's like, well, that's not how I work. Like, I'm going to overdub the crap out of this thing, man. Like, there's going to be tons of layers of guitars and synths everywhere. And, like, this isn't a live recording at like a mobile studio. Like to me, it's like, it's an experience, and I'm going to build it and craft it and sculpt, and we're going to go to this place and go to that place. Like, I've never been excited. I mean, other bands do that very well, mind you. I just don't think it's great for our band, like that kind of approach. And I think finding those engineers like Greg Norman at Electrical, who we've worked with, or with Jay Robbins, has just been awesome. Like, that we can find these engineers are like, oh, I get what you're doing. Okay. And we go from there, But yeah, mixing is crucial.
Mixing is crucial?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And as far as Jay Robbins' suggestions for the arrangements and how songs should end, is that something that you look for in an engineer? Do you want somebody who will also give you that kind of feedback?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I think to us, like, just kind of like someone that will be honest, and someone that, like that is in it with us for sure. Like, I think there's definitely a relationship aspect that of like, it's good when they're like, what if you did this thing? And you're like, okay. And it's, then that we're all on the same page. Like, we're all in this thing together, like your name's on it too, buddy. Like, I think that it's something that we look for is like, especially just with how, I think because earlier we maybe had engineers that we were a little bit of a challenge for them. But we also had some engineers like Jeremy Limos. He does a lot of live sound now. Like, he does live sound for the Shins and Iron and Wine and stuff. But he was in this drone band called White Light when Locrian started, and he recorded The Clearing that Steven was on and our first 7-inch. And like, he was just this great engineer of like full of ideas and like, no idea was too crazy. If I'm like, I want to mic this piano right now, he'd be like, okay, and he mic the piano. Like, I'm like, no, the inside, not the outside. Like, I would have this weird sound, and he would do it, and I was like, this is great, like whatever crazy idea I have, like they're on, like Jeremy was there with me, and it's the same thing with Jay, same thing with Greg. It's like, I have this idea for this thing, and they're like, well, how does that work? How does that happen sonically? And what mic is the best? And then we start getting into the weeds on it, and it's great. Like, it's like we're really, getting into how that works. And I think, for us, that's kind of like, I'm not an engineer, like I don't know what preamp to put that through. I don't know how to get those sounds, especially like, when it comes to drums or miking amplifiers. And like, I don't know that stuff, man. Like, I wish I did. I pay attention, I really do, and I get it, I know, but but that's that's like their life, and I trust them. To be able to trust someone is really important.
you want to say anything about Brad Boatwright, who handled the mastering for the album?
Sure. Brad's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I think mastering, I really enjoy that it's like become people are more serious about it. And it's strange to me how it really just takes a record. Like mixing is really important for us. Like mixing is like part of like the final composition element. And I know not every band thinks of it that way. I get it. But like to us, it's like, this is too long. And in mixing, let's just kind of shorten this up and tighten that part up, or maybe like double this thing at the end. Or, like that's really to us, like at mixing, we'll kind of like finish it, right? Mastering, though, it's like where all of a sudden it's like, holy crap, the drums like have this wallop, and like, man, it just sounds, like the stereo like panorama of sound is just becomes wider. And Brad makes it just sound so alive. And I really think he's a great mastering engineer. And I think also compared to other mastering engineers, I think he's very affordable, and I'm always like, just always impressed. Like, I'm like, because I lived with mixes for so long and I listen to things so repetitively and I'm like picking it apart. And I'm like, but I always like in the back of my mind, like, wait till it's mastered.
Right. Yeah.
And then it goes to Brad. Oh my gosh. Like he just like crushes it. And I think he really takes his job very seriously, and he knows he's the last hand that's on it before production, and I think he's very sensitive to that. And I've always, I've had multiple other bands bring things to him because I'm like, he's great at what he does. It will be a night and day, difference. And you're going to be used to the mix, and you're going to be picking it apart. And then you're going to send it to Brad, and you're going to get it back and be like, this is the record. And I love that about that experience. Like I mean, like with an engineer, it's like, I can trust Brad. I know Brad's going to like listen to it as much as I do and pick it apart. And he's like, he'll be like, this is one option, and here's another option. And like, he'll like give you different options, and you're like crap. Like, so I have to listen to that 100 times each, like, but it's like, it's because there's like, he's taking his job so seriously. And I love that. Like, that to me, it's like why I'll bring in projects, like, and why I look forward to getting that folder back from him, like, what did he do? And putting it on my stereo and being like, man, this thing just sounds full and big and loud as it needs to be. And I'm always really pleased.
You mentioned that you guys haven't been playing shows regularly or recently. Do you guys have anything lined up for the summer?
Yeah. So in July, we'll be on in the Northeast through Canada to the Midwest. And we're hoping to get back out kind of hopefully the West Coast in the wintertime is our plan. We, two of us have like academic type of jobs. So we're kind of like on some fall, spring semester kind of schedule. So kind of, right. It's like you have all this time, but then like it's not the perfect time to like be on tour. So, we've been pretty committed to getting back on the road for this record, and we're finalizing all of that. Literally today, we're in the middle of a lot of emails, but it's all happening. Yes, for sure. July will be kind of mid to late July. We'll be on the road.
So by the time people hear this episode, End Terrain will be out through Profound Lore Records. Terence, please tell everyone how they can order the album. What's the best way to get it?
Through Bandcamp, through Profound Lore's merch table. It's going to be in a lot of shops, it looks like. And, come to Locrian's Bandcamp page. And yeah, that's probably the best way. I mean, obviously there's like streaming all over the place, but I really would encourage everyone to get the physical copy of the record. We spent a lot of time on it, and it comes with a book, and the CD comes with a PDF of the book. And keep an eye on our stuff, because we're actually making kind of like addendums to the record. One of them will be a cassette audio book on tape of the book, and another one will be of field recordings from the world that we've been writing about. So we have a lot of interesting future plans that'll be kind of rolled out in the next month for the record.
Do you want to say anything about the vinyl variants that Profound Lore is putting out?
They look insane. As always, I was super stoked. We've had a pretty great relationship there. New Catastrophism had some really great vinyl variants, and we had a lot of fun with that one too. It was a really pretty poster in the LP that came with it that was really fun to do. And there's this great like UV spot gloss on End Terrain that we had done on New Catastrophism, and we were able to do on this one. So yeah, I feel we've been very fortunate. Like whenever we're like, what if we did this? Like nobody's like, no. So it's been really nice, and they look very handsome. I think the CDs have arrived at my place. They should be available shortly, and then I think LPs will be coming in really soon, and they look great. Like I mean, some really great color variants there, and I'm into that. So it's pretty cool.
And you did some videos for some of the songs, right?
I made one, and then a collaborator of ours, John Bradburn from the UK, did the first one for Chronoscapes. Yeah, they were like, make a visualizer, and I was like, I had like 3 days to make a visualizer for Excarnate Light, and I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. That was like my whole weekend was making that. Like, that's all I did. But I was like, I don't understand the concept of like visualizer versus music video, so I just made a video. Like I don't know, man. Like I don't know the difference. Like, so yeah, I had a lot of fun. It's all like I found all these really great like clips of like methane gas and like gas leaks and stuff in like thermal cameras, and I don't know. That was like my inspiration. But yeah, I had fun. Yeah, I teach like motion graphics and video and digital fabrication and stuff. So I was like, I should do it. I should make it. That's what I teach. I should do it.
Did you do the videos in After Effects?
I did the video first in Premiere, and then I glitched it kind of in After Effects with a few effects I built. Kind of like I built like a plugin that I could like run things through and get this consistent kind of like glitch through the scale feature.
Oh wow!
And it came out really cool in the end. I think, yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Cool.
Thank you. Do you do video production, or like is that something you're into? Or
I do. Yeah, I do motion graphics mostly for online social media. But I've been playing around with like 3D animation and stuff like that lately, mostly in After Effects.
Yeah, After Effects is pretty awesome. Like I'm teaching like an intro to After Effects class right now, and it's just funny to me. Like I have a lot of students come from like they've all learned Premiere, and then we get in there, I'm like, oh, you have no idea. This timeline's going to be nuts. Like, and then like they're like right now we're kind of halfway through, about to go into the midterm, and I can tell they're like, there's so many things to remember where you put it. I'm like, yeah, it can be a lot. Like, with it, and like that's what makes it awesome. Like whatever vector you made in Illustrator, bring it on into After Effects. Now you can animate it. Like, it's pretty exciting. Like, and I like it because it's like if you're an Adobe person, this makes sense. It's like everything you would use, Photoshop, Illustrator, whatever. Now you can manipulate everything in time and add audio, and I think it's pretty cool. I actually really do like After Effects, but you can get so lost. There's just you can go so deep with like the 3D stuff, and then like it's not even scratching the surface when you get to like Cinema 4D or like Houdini, or those things are just like, man, like particle effects, and I like that world. It's not my main thing I do, but it's like I'm really interested in it. It's the potential there. It's so amazing to me.
So if people want to follow Locrian online and get all the tour dates and see the videos that we talked about, what's the best way to do that?
So I don't manage much of the Locrian stuff, so I'm looking it up right now. Please forgive me. I just committed the cardinal sin of doing an interview.
It's okay. You'd be surprised how many bands have to check their own Encyclopedia Metallum page to. I just like, I don't do it, and my friend like Locrian, Andre and Locrian does it, and it's like I'm like, I should have done my work before I came here. At Locrian Official is kind of where most of our stuff is, on Instagram, Facebook, on TikTok, and
I guess we're still on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter anymore, but I guess the band is. But yeah, you can find us all there. And follow us on Bandcamp too, because that's kind of like the most, kind of like what we update, probably the most like direct, like with different like merch and different tour dates and things we have coming up.
And do you have a website where people can follow your work and your writing? Your visual art and your writing?
Oh, sure. Yeah. TerenceHannum.com. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. Please. Yeah, sure. Come follow me. Sure. Yeah. You can see a bunch of the different art I'm making, and I'll post about writing and stuff on there too. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say?
No, I'm good. Thanks for the interview. This has been great. Thanks, Adrian. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Terence.